We can.
All right.
So let me introduce you all to the voice you hear. This is Annette Uroskie, and she's been an art teacher and a practicing artist for 50 years. A graduate of Pennsylvania State University and the Maryland Institute of Art with a Master in Fine Arts, she taught art 23 years at the Key School in Annapolis as the head of the visual art department. Initially a printmaker, Annette won many awards and had one-woman and group shows in the Baltimore area. She was in the Baltimore Museum of Art Biennial, as well as the Peel Museum, Easton Academy of the Arts Permanent Collection, and Virginia Art League. Her second medium was batik, which she sold prolifically in the area, doing shows like Sugarloaf and the Annapolis Arts Festival. Most recently, she has been experimenting in digital photography and Photoshop pictures and mixed media, as well as experimenting with watercolor on some new papers, including Yupo. She has been vice president of the Annapolis Watercolor Club and received 3 first-place awards in recent years in their juried shows. She also was juried into the Baltimore Watercolor Society Mid-Atlantic Regional shows in each of the last 4 years and received awards in 2 of them. Her work can be seen on Flickr under Annette's Art Flickr. Annette, welcome.
Thank you, Deb. I'm so sorry we can't see each other visually, but at least the voice will do.
We do have your picture in the note.
Oh, good.
Some comfort there. So
Wonderful.
tell us about the show that you named All Things Bright and Beautiful.
Okay. First of all, I want to thank you, Deb, and big shout out to Janina, is it? Janina Ortiz?
Janina Ortiz,
designed
yes.
the set for my visuals online.
Above and Beyond on January 1st. She worked to get this together.
Oh, she's amazing. My husband even commented how wonderful it looks. So thank you very much for enhancing my work. Wonderful. Okay, the work is watercolor on Yupo, and maybe we can talk about that if we have time, but I can be realistic or fanciful in my composition, and at one point I was going to call the show Reality and Fantasy, and that didn't sound that great. Another time I thought, well, maybe Flora and Fauna, because I do so much of flora and fauna. But a friend had sent me an email to listen to a choral group from England, and they were wonderful. And their second song was All Things Bright and Beautiful, and it just hit me like a lightning bolt. I thought, oh my gosh, that's so perfect. Because, first of all, I loved the hymn as a child. Second of all, I do a lot of things that deal with light and shining on surfaces or in landscape. And as far as beautiful, well, the viewer has to look and decide if they think, like I do, that most of the work is pretty and beautiful. That's it.
That's good. And by the way, I have your image as though we were listening to you talk. So now I'm going to move to that second image of you in the exhibit where you're working on Yupo paper. Since we don't get to do that little, so tell us a little bit about Yupo paper and some of the fun things that you can get from it.
Wow. Well, you read I was, among other things, a printmaker, a batik artist, Photoshop photographer, and finally somebody, I don't even remember how I learned about Yupo, but it was love at first sight. It's like when the thunderbolt hits. I tried it. It worked for me. I know it doesn't work for a lot of people. They try it and say, oh my gosh, how can you work on this? But I just adore it. It does magical things when you put wet watercolor. A lot of people work with alcohol inks, but I work purely with watercolor so that I can enter some of the juried shows with watercolor. But when you put the watercolor on the paper, it just runs all over the place, and you can tilt your paper, and you can add sprays of water and sprays of alcohol. And I was going to do a little demo, but we can when we see some of the pictures to talk about, I can show you areas that highlight what Yupo does. It's just magical.
That's fantastic. Let's go ahead and look at some of the art that you've created with this paper. How about we look at Dragonfly Fantasy?
Yeah, Dragonfly Fantasy is a favorite. Dragonfly Fantasy really highlights in many different ways how I work or what I do. First of all, it came, we were all sitting around, I know this whole year practically with COVID, trying to figure out what to do with ourselves. And I decided to clean up my studio one day. I was throwing out old work and, just going through it. And I hit this work on regular paper, which was unusual. I hadn't saved a lot of watercolors on regular paper, but it was kind of a study of leaves of tropical plants. We go to Cancun, Mexico. We have a timeshare there. And I do paintings of, or I did a few paintings of the really colorful leaves. So I liked the work, but I didn't like it as is. I stuck it away for a while. And at the same time, collage was coming up verbally in different circles, and they had started to allow collage if the work was watercolor. This sounds funny, but watercolor paper of your own making on your watercolor. So for some reason that was in my head. So I cut the leaves out, and I did the background in Yupo. And if you just look at the background, if you can just concentrate on that without looking at the leaves for a minute, you see how the colors run together, and areas are created that you're creating, but you really don't know exactly what you're creating because they're running all over the place. And you have to let it dry overnight because it's sitting on this plastic paper, and it takes a while for the water to just evaporate out of the watercolor and lay there. But on top of that background, then, I overlaid the leaves, and it still didn't look exactly right. And by the way, I use a lot of circles in my art. Ever since I started making art, I fell in love with the shape of a circle. And so for no good reason other than it's a circle in my favorite shape, it went down in the center to sort of help the composition out. And then there's a little one on the lower left. Needed a little something else. And my secondary interest this year was in dragonflies. They were so prolific. They were on my pond, and I was shooting them with a camera all the time. So I thought, I think I'll start working with dragonflies. So I painted some dragonflies and cut them out and placed them. And we all know that you need 3 things in art. And I often laugh because 3 is a religious number as well, as we all know. And so I get a kick out of when someone says, we have to have 3. I think, I know you have to have 3. So 3 dragonflies joined the team there, and it created the final Dragonfly Fantasy.
And it's a beautiful image. I too am fascinated with dragonflies. I think they're pretty popular these days, but I didn't know this was a bit of collage work, so that's fascinating.
Yep, it is.
Let's go take a look at your triptych.
Okay, the second one is
Bermuda Wildflowers. Fantasy.
Yeah, this is another. I add fantasy to some of the works that are fanciful, in fact. And this one is called Bermuda Wildflowers Fantasy. The last work took, by the way, maybe 6 months. I know that sounds long, but they get put away and come back and put away and come back. And the reason I bring that up is that this work is a triptych. It ended up being a triptych, but the middle painting stood alone for about a year, or maybe 2 years, or maybe 3 years. It's been around for a long time. And I think it was even in a frame, and I think it even was entered into a show and won an honorable mention. But for some reason, that work called to me. I was looking at it one day, and I thought, that's not finished. I don't like it. So I took it out of the frame, thought about it, stuck it down on a bigger piece of Yupo, and said, it needs to move out on both sides. It needs to grow. So I cut out the paper in terms of 3, the triptych, and I just painted, carrying it on out into both left and right sides. And this one is really a fanciful work for me. All those shapes, and I usually look at something to paint, photograph, even if I do a takeoff on it. This was entirely man-made, mind-made in the end. All those shapes and the directions that they went and the curves that they took. It reminds me sometimes of Dr. Seussian or Art Nouveau. People tell me it looks Art Nouveau. So that's what happened. And this one went on to get entered in a Baltimore Watercolor Society show that was a juried show at Delaplane Art Center in Frederick. And much to my surprise, it won a second prize. And the juror was a master of Oriental brushwork, Sumi brushwork, and he commented that some of the work reminded him of Oriental brushwork. So I was delighted, very, very happy, and didn't sell, but I got to bring it home, and maybe it'll find a home soon.
Your additions did give it that Oriental feel, where you left the space open, and it's very fresh in its brushstrokes as well. But that is fascinating how that evolved.
Isn't that an interesting? Yeah. And
Yeah, that was a lot of fun.
When someone says, how long did it take to make, I can say 5 years. Really,
yeah,
only about
there's no way to charge for that.
Couple weeks, yeah.
I'm moving the screen forward to the water lilies.
Okay, when I was going to do when you could see me, I was going to just talk a little bit more about this is a quickie, about how a lot of the time I am tighter in my brushwork, and in this one, it really loosened up. I tried to be as loose as humanly possible, and I studied Monet to some extent, and just tried to be very fresh. And I was very, very happy with the flower in this one, how loose it is, and how in not too many brush strokes. You'll see, if you look at the entire show, you'll see the one next to it is very tight, extremely tight, and this one I just really allowed to, let her rip, and it just came out wonderfully. I think I'm in love with this one, and the water as well shows off Yupo perfectly.
Yeah.
And light. Talk about light coming in. You can see the light on the water sparkling on the top, and that's something Yupo can do with spray. Sometimes spray water, sometimes spray alcohol, and you get those just sparkling drops.
So what's your favorite part of using the Yupo paper, or your favorite technique aspect?
I think it's when I put down as a background. It's very, very wet. I mean, it is sopping wet. And I drop color or paint color into it and swirl it and just see what it does. It does things. I have to tell you a little story if I got a second here. My husband had a grandfather who was a second order monk, and he kept the most beautiful flowers you've ever seen. He really tended to them, and he also kept wild animals. But when someone would ask him, how do you get your flowers to be so beautiful, he'd say, I don't do it, Bozha does it. And Bozha was the word in Ukrainian for God, I believe. So I don't do it, Yupo does it.
That is a great story. We'll talk more about that one.
Anyway.
We will look at number 10, Beautiful Swimmers.
Yeah, this is the big gun. And again, story behind it. This one came from a photograph. I was shooting koi, not literally, but with a camera, a lot the other year. I fell in love with them. I'm a Pisces, by the way, and I love water. So a lot of my work, not necessarily in this show, it's about 50-50, but a lot of the new work I'm doing just has something to do with water. And so I was shooting koi, and the one day where I was, there were these beautiful water patterns, just gorgeous. I must have 20 lovely, lovely shots where they're not shadows. I don't know how the reflections, I guess, or maybe they are shadows, but they were definitive. They were, very sharply delineated, and they were just beautiful. So I decided, okay, we'll try to paint some. So with the group that I work with down in South County, I did this in 3 hours, which for me is just ridiculous. But I was absolutely sure and certain it wasn't finished. So I put it up for critique at the end of the painting session, and everyone said, oh, well, it's lovely, blah, blah, blah. And I said, yeah, but it's not finished, obviously. And they said, what are you talking about? I said, no, it has to be tightened up and shored up, and those lines have to be sharp and, razor edged and like the photograph. Well, the head of the group that paints there said, Annette, put this away for a month or two. Don't paint on it, please. Put it away for a month or two, and then look at it and decide what you want to do. And I begrudgingly thought, okay. But I did. I took it home, put it away. But in the meantime, decided I wanted that painting done, so I painted another one. And in the second one, I was very tight and very controlled and very delineated, and it turned out exactly the way I wanted. So I showed that at BWS Middle States and won a prize with it and was very happy and thought, oh, yes, Annette, you made the right decision. And it sold. So a year later, at the Maryland Federation of Art Gallery, they have a show with a very presumptuous title to it, I think, but at any rate, it's called Strokes of Genius. So it was the only thing I had that was loose and brush strokey, and I thought, well, if they're going to judge on strokes, I guess this is the one I'll enter. So I entered it, and the juror was Raoul Middleman, which probably means nothing to anybody except that he's a master painter at the Maryland Institute of Art, where I graduated with my MFA. And he had been a teacher and an instructor of mine 50 years earlier, 50 years almost to the date, certainly to the month. And he didn't think much of my painting at the time. He came and painted on one of my works, I remember, and I was a little disgruntled at that. But at any rate, he's kind of a curmudgeon. So I went to the opening of the show. Well, first of all, I got in, which was like, wow, this is incredible, because it's a very heavily entered show, and I was just like, holy cow, I got in. So we got dressed up and went to the opening, and Raoul's there, and I sort of mentioned to him that, I had him as a teacher, blah, blah, blah. And so they don't put the awards on the paintings until they're announced. So we're standing there, and he goes through the honorable mentions and talks a little bit about him, and then he gets to the top three. And it wasn't a 1, 2, 3, first, second, and third show. It was a juror's choice show. So 3 of us got juror's choices. And I've given it away, the surprise. So I'm standing there, and he goes, they say the first name, yada, yada, and the second name, and then Annette Uroskie. And I'll tell you, Deb, I could have fainted. It was just unbelievable. And I went up all excited, and we chatted. And so this is my first place in a show, and then it went on to get into the BWS and win a prize there. So I guess it was a lot better than I thought it was. And it's still not necessarily my favorite, but I had to brag on it a bit. So that's
I'm really loving this looser style that you've been playing with a little bit. And yet, if you look at the face or the head of this koi, it's very descriptive. It seems loose, but it's extremely descriptive. And the body mass, the volume in that body is just so masterfully done. It appears to be just brushstrokes loosely placed, but look at how you feel. I could almost grab that little squirmy thing. I'm just amazed by it. And then the water, I'm fascinated by the circles in the water. I am also a water sign, but I'm Cancer. And water is in most of my artwork as well. But I'm fascinated with the circles because you've put those in a couple pieces lately. And I'm really liking the circles.
They're a favorite, so
circles and water, and then that squirmy little fish body you could just about feel is amazing. That's an amazing piece. We could open this up for questions if anybody wants to ask any questions or comments, or we can begin to close it. However people want to do it. Anybody want to talk?
I have a quick question, Annette. I always hear Yupo referred to as a plastic paper. Is it actually paper? Is it made with fibers?
No, it truly, this is it's been around now for maybe 10 years only. And I started working on it about 6 or 7, so I got in pretty much at the start. But It is plastic. It truly is plastic. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. There are no fibers. And it sort of shouldn't really be called paper.
Right.
The first couple of years, I could enter it in local shows, like Annapolis Watercolor Club. And I didn't announce that it was Yupo. I mean, I just stuck it in the show and nobody said anything. But then as the years went by, it started getting on people's radar, and they had to make a decision whether they were going to allow it in, like, the New York show and, New York Watercolor Society. And what happened was they did, in fact, decide to allow it in, and the big gun was the Royal British Watercolor Society decided to allow it, and at that point the floodgates opened and everybody said, okay, fine, we can work on this plastic paper, which wasn't even really paper, but it was allowed.
Well, it's a little bit about like using drafting film if you're part of the Colored Pencil Society.
Is that right?
Drafting film is, again, not paper, it's film, and you can work front and back on that, which gives it another dimension too. But these new materials are creeping their way in, and they're fun, and they're expanding some of the possibilities.
Well, it does things that you cannot do on paper. I mean, paper just doesn't do them.
No, it's
and one of them are the magic that happens when you stir and dab. And there's one more work. We probably don't have time, but as you're looking at, as the people listening are looking at the work, it works well with stencils too, because you can take Yupo back with paint on it back to white.
Give me a hint what we're looking for, and I'll move it to it.
Yeah.
Which one?
Well, let's see. Lady with the conversation.
Yes.
Let's try the conversation.
See if I can find her.
She has a background, doesn't she?
I'm working on it.
Or the one.
Madonna of the Rocks, too. I have, or the conversation.
Anika,
got it. I've
Russian name.
Got the conversation.
Name.
I have us on the conversation. Go ahead and talk to us about those.
Does that have stencil work where you can see a stencil has been laid down?
Pardon my alliteration, but it has extensive stencil work.
Oh, great. Yeah, that's the one then. Now that is a bought stencil. And so I have reservations about it's also very illustrational. It was just a fun piece. I mean, I at one point did a children's book, and I guess there's still that illustration aspect, in my nature. And I got a big kick out of this, trying to decide what to do with the model. It was just a sketch of a model. And I decided, in fact, she's the same model as the next one. I'm not sure. I've lost track of where I am. But at any rate, I'm rambling. You can lay a stencil down. Oh, it's a bought stencil. That's what I wanted to say. It's a Michaels bought stencil because I wouldn't cut something that elaborate. And it's just to add pattern.
Well, it's heavily influenced by Matisse.
Oh yeah, for sure. And to me, it's just delightful. Her having a conversation with the goldfish. She's sort of a fortune teller or something, and
it's a delightful picture. And there are those circles again, repeated all kinds of ways. It's a delightful picture. It was one of the ones that stood out to me from the first when you were submitting the images. So I'm glad that you took a moment to talk about that. We are about to come to the close of the time that Zoom is providing us. So I think this is a good time to thank you so much, both for the generosity and bravery of doing a Zoom show and a Zoom interview and dealing with all of the little things that happen when one tries to do a Zoom interview.
Deb, thank you so much for being so patient and figuring this out, how to do this, how to get this done. I appreciate it.
Well,
thank you.
I won't say that I figured it out yet, but we're
And I want to thank you. This is Paula. I've been to many Meet the Artist receptions in person, but this is one time when the technology really does help to have this kind of conversation and be able to focus on the art. And I thank you both for putting it together. It's been wonderful.
Thank you. We will also attempt to send Janina the recording. And first, I would like to attempt to take the first 14 minutes out of it. Figure out what we were doing. But if we don't, we don't. I'm not going to worry about
All
it.
right. No, don't worry about it, Tim.
Thank you. It's been great.
But thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
And we'll see if we can get this up on the site for those that couldn't get in before, because that's the second time that's been frustrating to folks, I think, trying to get in. We'll work it out eventually. So,
All good.
good day, everyone, and enjoy the rest of the show. There's more to be seen. Go to the UUA site, go to worship, scroll down to arts and music, scroll over to Gallery 333, and you should find a link to the January-February show by Annette Uroskie. Have a good
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Bye.